All right, welcome to Big G. My name is Jody Lamb and I'm the Manager of Marketing Communications. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about our employee stock ownership plan and what that means to you as a new driver here at Big G Express, or a driver who may just not know that much about the ESOP or looked into it before. So I'd like to start off by telling you why we're an ESOP and kind of how that all started. Big G Express started back in 1995 when Pat Marsh and Jack Marsh founded Big G. At the time, Mr. Pat owned Goggin Truck Line, which was the oldest LTL carrier in the state of Tennessee, and saw a need for the truckload side for their customers. So Jack was running about 10 old Goggin trucks at the time for Big G, and that was back in 95. Fast forward a little bit, in 98, Mr. Pat and his partner at the time, they decided to sell Goggin. They sold to Old Dominion. What he didn't like about that process, though, was within the year, he's running into people from Goggin who had worked for him for lots of time, were like family to him, who had lost their jobs maybe because they had moved some positions out of Shelbyville, Tennessee. So he knew he didn't really like that process of selling and losing what the company had built up to be. In 2009, by this point, we had almost 400 trucks at Big G Express, and there were two other minority owners in the business. So Patty Corley, David Nolan, and then Jack and Pat Marsh were the owners. They started thinking about what's the future of Big G. You know, they weren't looking to retire right away, but they also wanted to have a plan in place, and they didn't have any children who were looking to take over the business, but they were looking out for Big G Express and the company that they had built and the successful company they had built, and looking at their options. Well, our accounting firm, they're out of Indianapolis, KSM, Catsap Miller. They work with a lot of transportation companies, but they are also an ESOP themselves. They have an employee stock ownership plan, and they do ESOP advisory. So they had actually kind of pitched it to them, have you thought about forming an ESOP, and put that idea in their head. So the ownership group, they did a lot of research, looked into other companies who have started ESOPs, and started doing the work looking at the feasibility of Big G starting an ESOP. And that all came through in 2009. So what is an ESOP exactly? An employee stock ownership plan is a qualified retirement benefit, and it started back in the mid-1970s, and when Congress put laws into place to protect ESOPs and to put some regulations around it. We follow the same rules and regulations as 401k and pensions under Employee Retirement Income Securities Act, ERISA. So we don't just make this stuff up. It's actually something that the government has put into place and gives us tax benefits for companies who start ESOPs. So the ownership group, when they make the sale to an ESOP, they have a tax benefit, a tax break, and then Big G Express actually doesn't have to pay taxes because we're 100% S Corp. We don't pay tax, federal income tax, on what we put into the ESOP. So there's benefits there, kind of an incentive to have an ESOP. What does it mean for employees? Okay, so it is a free retirement plan, and you earn shares in the company based on your compensation and years of service here at Big G. So each year when you're eligible, we do an allocation of shares for the year, and basically anybody who's eligible, you take your piece of the pie based on your compensation and years of service, and it's put into this retirement account in your ESOP account for future use. So some people think this is too good to be true. Like, how are you giving us something for nothing, right? Where's all this money coming from? And how does an ownership group like sell to an ESOP when we're not paying any money for the shares, right? Well, what was put into place back in the 1970s, it allowed companies to form an ESOP trust. So we have an ESOP trust, our Big G ESOP trust, and the trust can borrow money to pay for the shares. So in Big G's case, we borrowed 100% of the shares right away in 2009. Some companies may start off smaller. There's about 10,000 ESOPs in the US, and probably about 4,000 are 100% employee owned. Some may start off with 20%, 30%, and kind of build up over time. We were able to do 100% ESOP from day one. So we have this loan out here. It's a 20-year amortization loan. So if you think about a mortgage, you're paying off 15 years, 30 years. Our ESOP loan is 20 years. We started in 2009, and we're almost halfway through our ESOP loan. And each year, as the company's profitable, as Big G's profitable, we're making payments to that ESOP loan. And when we make a payment to the loan, that releases the shares, and that's what gets allocated to employees each year. So that's great news for those people coming in new to the ESOP and to Big G, because we haven't released all our shares yet. There's still plenty to be had. When we talk about the ESOP, there are some rules and regulations, some basics of the plan. You become a participant once you've worked for a year. You enter on one of the entry dates, either July 1st or January 1st. So if someone starts May 2018, their year anniversary is May 2019, come into the plan July 1st, 2019. There's also a component known as vesting, and if you are familiar with any 401ks, there's typically a vesting time, whereas if you leave before you're vested, then you forfeit the shares. For our ESOP, it's a 3-year cliff vesting. So once you've been here for the 3 years, you're 100% vested. If you retire for any reason or you term for any reason, you're eligible for those shares. So there's not really an exact amount I can tell you each year that you're going to have in your ESOP account. We don't give $5,000 or 100 shares each year. The shares are divided based on the number of people who are receiving the shares and then what your compensation and years of service would allow for your shares. So the best way I can give you an idea of what you can expect about the ESOP is kind of talk about some real life examples of driver accounts and how they've grown in the last 3 years. I have the information for 2016 right now. We'll get the 2017 stock information soon. But I have an example of a driver who was hired in April of 2013. Their 2014 balance was around $4,000. Their 2015 balance went up to around $11,000, and their 2016 balance was at $20,000. Pretty significant increase over those 3 years. Another example is a June 2008 hire date. They went from around $40,000 to $60,000 to $80,000 in the last 3 years. So that's a significant growth, about $20,000 each year in the growth of their stock. They were getting more allocation of shares for the time they worked that year, and also seeing the growth in the stock price. So that's just a good example of maybe what you could expect, not knowing exactly how much you would get each year, how many shares, but you can see from example of real hire dates and real driver accounts, kind of the potential there. One of the most common questions that I get is, well, how do you get this money, especially after you see some of the examples of the driver accounts and what they've accumulated over the time that we've been in ESOP since 2009. And that has to do with our distribution policy. So we go back to, it is a retirement plan, and it's meant to be a retirement plan, and we have things in place. There are 2 different ways that our stock is distributed, or that your money is distributed once you leave Big G Express. So if you're age 65 or older upon death or 100% disability, that's paid out in a lump sum. And if you're under age 65 when you leave, it's paid out 1/5 over 5 years. We've been starting that in the year following the year that you leave. So just to give you an idea of how the timing works, it's not immediate. We're still privately held. We're not publicly traded, so we don't have a different stock price annually. It takes some time to get our stock price. Right now, we're waiting on our 2017 stock price. We should find out at our annual meeting on June 30th. So if somebody were to leave, say, the end of 2017, then we'll know their stock price mid-year 2018. They'll get a distribution form in the fall of 2018, and we would either cut the check or roll over the money by the end of the plan year. If they're age 65 or older, they have access to the lump sum, and if they're under age 65, they would have access to 1/5. So it's not an immediate, and it's not a fast, like, hey, I'm gonna leave Big G today, cut my check tomorrow. It is a timing thing, and we don't just make up these rules. We're following the rules and regulations under ERISA. And again, it's meant to be a retirement plan. It's a long-term benefit. You may not, if you start Big G today, you're probably not gonna see a statement for about 2 years, but you can think ahead to the great benefit that it may have for you in retirement, or even just as a wealth building tool. If you're younger, you're not looking for retirement for many years, you can look at it as a wealth building tool, because you can still have access to that in the future. Let's talk a little bit about the value of Big G stock and how that happens. In 2009, when we started the ESOP, our stock price was $5.88 a share, and at the end of 2016, it was up to $43.34. We've had significant growth. Several factors play into that. Again, we are still privately held. We're not publicly traded. So we have a valuation once a year. We have an independent valuation firm that determines our value. a lot of what goes into that has to do with how we perform as a company and our profitability. What the valuation firm is doing is they're looking at the fair market value of Big G Express, what a willing buyer would pay for Big G at that given time. So you think about, if you're somebody looking to buy a trucking company, what are you going to be looking at? What's important to you to know? Are they making money? How much money are they making? What do you foresee the company making in the future? What's your return on investment going to be? So a big portion of that is looking at our finances and how things are going, how we're doing as a company. They also factor in how the industry's doing, how publicly traded companies are trading. So that factors into our stock value as well. You think about, if you're looking to buy a company, what you would say you're willing to pay, you think about the risk involved as well. So you're going to want to know, like, our safety record, how our retention is as a company, our customer base. One thing that we strategically do as part of the ESOP is looking at our customer base and making sure we don't have one customer that's really over 10% of our freight. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, right? So we do things strategically to kind of diversify our freight, and that also helps in turn for our drivers, to keep them busy year round and keep the freight moving. Something else that affects our value is the fact that we are paying down the debt. So day one in 2009, when our stock price was $5.88 a share, we had just taken on this ESOP loan, millions of dollars, to pay for the shares of the company. Just like you own a home and you're paying down your mortgage and getting equity in your company, we're paying down the loan, the ESOP loan, and gaining equity in the company. So right now we have several factors playing in our favor with being profitable and growing, and also paying down the debt. So when you're thinking about, our fair market value and how our stock price has gone up, also consider the fact that in 2009 we were at around 400 trucks, and now today we have around 600 trucks. So if you're a buyer looking at a company who is running profitably, are you going to pay more for 400 trucks or 600, right? You're going to pay more for 600. So those are some of the factors that have played into our growth, and we hope to continue growing. There's no guarantee that it will go up every year. Of course, it has so far. There will be downturns. There will be years where our stock price may go down a little. But overall, if you look at the stock market, you're going to see some ups and downs over time, and hopefully going up in the future. But just also know that this is all in Big G stock. This retirement account is not diversified. We encourage you to also invest in a 401k, which we do a company match. We match 10% on what you put in, up to 15% of your salary. So you put in $100, we're going to put in 10. And we encourage you to do that as well, and diversify your retirement and work on building wealth for the future so you can take care of your family and enjoy your retirement.